Backyard vegetable plots turned ordinary yards into small-scale farms, and one canned dish became the military's answer to fast food, a rich, creamy mixture with an odd nickname. Today, we're looking at 10 foods people relied on during World War II to make it through, and the surprising ways a global conflict reshaped what ended up on the American dinner table. It's easy to forget, looking back from today's grocery aisles stocked with endless choices, just how differently people ate less than a century ago. When the United States entered the war in December 1941, the government suddenly found itself needing to feed not just millions of civilians at home, but also a rapidly growing military stationed across multiple continents. Shipping lanes that once carried coffee, sugar, and rubber were now targets for enemy submarines. Farmland and factory labor that once went towards civilian goods were redirected toward the war machine. The result was a total reorganization of the American diet, built around scarcity, substitution, and a healthy dose of creativity in the kitchen. None of this unfolded overnight either. Within months of the declaration of war, the Office of Price Administration was issuing ration books to every household in the country, turning something as ordinary as grocery shopping into a careful exercise in budgeting stamps alongside cash. Home cooks who had never given a second thought to sugar, butter, or coffee suddenly had to plan meals around what their ration coupons would actually allow. Out of that pressure came a wave of substitutions, stand-ins, and outright inventions that would come to define the wartime American table. And it's those 10 foods, born out of necessity, that we're about to walk through.
1. Victory Gardens. Victory Gardens became a core part of American life for anyone wanting decent nutrition for their household. Also called war gardens or defense gardens, these plots sprang up at private homes and in public parks nationwide. The government pushed citizens to grow their own produce and herbs to stretch their rations further and support the war effort. Beyond providing food, the gardens lifted spirits by giving people a real sense of purpose and self-reliance. By growing their own food, Americans eased strain on the national food supply and helped sustain troops overseas. Roughly a third of the vegetables grown in the U.S. during the war came out of these victory gardens. The government didn't just suggest the idea and hope for the best. It launched advertising campaigns, complete with colorful posters urging families to dig for victory, and gardening guides distributed through libraries, schools, and local agricultural offices. Seed companies donated packets by the truckload, and even First Lady Eleanor Roosevelt planted a victory garden on the White House lawn to set an example. City dwellers without much yard space got creative too, planting in window boxes, rooftop containers, and vacant lots cleared for community gardening. Schools organized garden clubs where children learned to plant, weed, and harvest, turning the effort into a patriotic lesson as much as a food production strategy. By the peak of the program, an estimated 20 million victory gardens were in bloom nationwide.
2. Spam. Spam, a canned meat product from the Hormel Foods Corporation, took off during World War II. First introduced in 1937, it was made largely from pork shoulder and ham. With fresh meat hard to come by for troops, Spam served as a reliable substitute, since it shipped easily and stayed good for long stretches. Both soldiers and civilians ate it because it was cheap and worked in countless recipes. It became so central to the war effort that the military purchased more than 150 million pounds of it. Soldiers nicknamed it Special Army Meat as a running joke, though plenty of less flattering nicknames also made the rounds in mess halls and foxholes alike. Spam's appeal wasn't just about convenience, it solved a genuine logistical puzzle. Fresh meat spoiled quickly and required refrigeration that simply wasn't available on ships crossing the Atlantic or Pacific, let alone in jungle camps or desert outposts. A can of Spam could sit in a supply depot or a soldier's pack for months without spoiling, making it one of the most efficient ways to deliver protein to troops far from home. Hormel worked overtime to keep up with demand, and the product shipped to nearly every theater of the war, including the Soviet Union, where it was distributed through the Lend-Lease program and reportedly helped keep the Red Army fed during some of its toughest campaigns. Back home, resourceful cooks turned Spam into everything from fried Spam and eggs to Spam musubi,
a dish that took root in Hawaii and remains popular there today.
Number 3. Powdered eggs. Powdered eggs became a diet staple both stateside and for soldiers abroad. Fully dehydrated, they were far lighter and easier to transport than fresh eggs. Their appeal came from not needing refrigeration and lasting a long time on the shelf. People folded them into all kinds of recipes, from baked goods to scrambled eggs and omelets. The dehydration process had been developed back in the 1930s, but really caught on during the war as demand grew for food that traveled well and lasted. Kept cool and free of oxygen, powdered eggs could last 5 to 10 years in storage. The process itself involved cracking fresh eggs, separating and blending the yolks and whites, then spray drying the mixture into a fine yellow powder that could be packed into tins and shipped anywhere in the world. A single pound of powdered eggs was roughly equivalent to 3 dozen fresh eggs, which made it enormously efficient for military logistics. Instead of shipping fragile crates of eggs that could crack or spoil, the Army could send compact, lightweight tins that took up a fraction of the space. Soldiers weren't always thrilled with the taste or texture, and powdered eggs earned a reputation for being rubbery or slightly metallic tasting compared to the real thing, inspiring more than a few grumbling jokes in letters home. Still, cookbooks of the era worked hard to make the best of it, offering tips on how to whip powdered eggs with a bit of extra water or milk to improve their consistency, and home cooks used them in cakes, pancakes, and custards when fresh eggs were hard to find or too expensive. 4. Mock apple pie. With fresh apples scarce and pricey, Americans got inventive with dessert and came up with mock apple pie. Despite the name, it had no apples at all. Instead, ordinary crackers were soaked in a spiced sugar-water mixture with cinnamon and nutmeg. Once baked into a pie crust, the softened crackers took on an apple-like texture and taste. The pie caught on because families could still enjoy something apple-flavored without needing ingredients that were rationed or unavailable. It mimicked real apple pie so convincingly that many people genuinely couldn't tell the two apart. The trick relied on simple food chemistry. Crackers soaked in a syrup of sugar, water, cream of tartar, and warm spices would soften and take on a texture strikingly similar to cooked apple slices, while the cinnamon and nutmeg supplied the flavor most people associated with apple pie in the first place. Ritz Crackers even printed the recipe directly on their boxes, turning it into one of the most widely circulated recipes of the era. It wasn't the first time the recipe had appeared either. Versions of cracker-based mock apple pie dated back to the 1800s, when settlers moving west sometimes found themselves without apples during long winters. But it was the sugar and produce shortages of the 1940s that brought the dish roaring back into American kitchens, proving that resourcefulness in the kitchen was as much a wartime skill as anything happening on the factory floor. 5. Chipped beef on toast, SOS. A go-to meal among American troops was creamed chipped beef on toast, nicknamed SOS, short for stuff on a shingle. It consisted of thin, dried beef strips folded into a creamy white sauce and ladled over toast. The military loved it because it came together fast, was filling, and was cheap to make in bulk. It actually traces back to a 1910 Army cooking manual, showing just how long it had been part of military food culture. The dish spread beyond the barracks too, becoming a diner favorite, especially in the mid-Atlantic states. The military slang term shingle for a piece of toast dates to around 1935. Mess sergeants appreciated SOS for practical reasons beyond just flavor. Dried beef kept for a long time without refrigeration. The white sauce could be stretched with flour and milk powder to feed large numbers of hungry soldiers. And the whole dish could be prepared in massive quantities, using little more than a big pot and a griddle for the toast. For homesick soldiers, it also carried a certain comfort food familiarity, since variations of creamed meat on toast had already been common in American home cooking for decades. Opinions on SOS were famously divided. Some veterans remember it fondly as one of the better items on the mess hall rotation, while others recall it as a running punchline, something served so often that soldiers joked about never wanting to see it again after coming home. Either way, its practicality made it a fixture of military dining well beyond World War II, continuing to show up in mess halls through the Korean War and beyond. Number 6. Depression cake, war cake. During the Great Depression,
a distinctive dessert known as depression cake gained popularity. It skipped milk, sugar, butter, and eggs, items that were either costly or scarce, and used flour, dried fruit like raisins or prunes, spices, and sometimes nuts instead. During both World Wars, it was also called war cake, since it avoided ingredients needed for soldiers. Radio programs and women's magazines helped the recipe spread, turning it into a well-known, budget-friendly treat. Its roots actually go back at least as far as the Civil War, underscoring how long it had helped families through hard times. What made the cake work without eggs or dairy was a clever bit of baking science. Boiling raisins or prunes with water, spices, and a small amount of fat released natural sugars and moisture into the batter, giving the cake sweetness and a dense, moist crumb without needing any of the traditionally essential ingredients. Some versions substituted a splash of vinegar and baking soda for the leavening usually provided by eggs, a trick that also shows up in other eggless wartime baking recipes of the period. Because it kept well and traveled easily, war cake was a popular item to mail overseas to soldiers, wrapped carefully to survive the long journey by ship. Home economics teachers and community groups also promoted the recipe as an economical way to stretch a household's food budget, and it remained a familiar sight at potlucks and church socials well into the post-war years.
7. Coffee rationing. Coffee rationing kicked in after German submarines began targeting ships carrying coffee beans from Latin America, making the beans difficult to source in the U.S. Starting in November 1942, the government limited purchases, allowing anyone over 15 to buy just 1 pound every 5 to 6 weeks. In response, Americans invented Roosevelt coffee, stretching old grounds further or blending in chicory or postum, a wheat-based drink. President Roosevelt himself gave up coffee for milk to demonstrate his support for the rationing program. Coffee rationing hit especially hard because, unlike some other rationed goods, there was no easy domestic substitute grown on American soil. Nearly all of the nation's coffee had to be imported, mostly from Brazil and other Latin American countries, making it particularly vulnerable to the disruption of shipping lanes. Households adapted by rationing their own coffee even more tightly than required, often rebrewing used grounds a second or even third time to squeeze out whatever flavor remained. Some people roasted and ground substitutes at home using chicory root, barley, or even toasted grain, producing a bitter, coffee-like drink that was more about ritual than flavor. Coffee rationing turned out to be relatively short-lived compared to other wartime restrictions. It was lifted in the summer of 1943 as shipping routes stabilized, but for the months it lasted, it became one of the most talked about sacrifices of the home front, since coffee was such a deeply ingrained part of the daily American routine.
8. Margarine. Butter grew scarce under rationing, so people reached for oleomargarine as a stand-in. Originally made from beef fat, margarine had shifted mostly to vegetable oil by wartime because animal fat had grown scarce while plant oils remained more plentiful. People used it just as they would butter, cooking, baking, and spreading it on bread. One key difference, margarine started out white, with yellow coloring added later to resemble butter more closely. Since several states outlawed selling pre-colored margarine, people often had to mix in the yellow dye themselves at home. This led to one of the more amusing rituals of wartime kitchens. Margarine typically arrived in a plastic bag alongside a small separate packet of orange-yellow dye. Home cooks, often the children of the household who found the task fun, would knead and squeeze the bag until the color was evenly distributed throughout the white margarine, turning it a passable butter yellow before it went on the table. The laws banning pre-colored margarine were largely the result of pressure from the powerful dairy industry, which saw the rising popularity of margarine as a threat to butter sales and lobbied hard to keep it looking visually distinct from the real thing. Some of these coloring restrictions actually persisted for years after the war ended, with a few states not repealing their margarine coloring laws until the 1950s, long after rationing itself had become a memory.
9. Organ meats and variety meats. Meat rationing pushed Americans towards cuts they'd typically avoided, including organ meats. Beef and chicken became harder to find, so items like tongue started showing up more often at dinner. People adapted by learning new ways to prepare it, making it a practical, nutrient-rich addition to their meals. This was part of a larger effort to preserve the more desirable cuts of meat for troops overseas. The government even ran a campaign promoting what it branded variety meats to help make rationing work. Beyond tongue, the campaign encouraged Americans to embrace liver, kidney, heart, brains, and sweetbreads, cuts that had traditionally been considered less desirable, but were in fact often more nutritionally dense than the muscle cuts everyone was used to, packed with iron, vitamin A, and protein. Government pamphlets and radio spots framed eating variety meats as a patriotic duty, complete with recipes designed to make unfamiliar cuts approachable for home cooks who had never prepared them before. Some households genuinely came to enjoy dishes like liver and onions or braised kidney stew, and a number of these recipes stuck around in American home cooking for decades after the war ended. Meat rationing itself worked through a coupon-based point system, where families were issued ration books and had to budget their points carefully across red meat, poultry, and other rationed goods, planning meals almost like a monthly budget spreadsheet just to make sure the family had enough points left to make it to the next ration period.
10. Chocolate bars for the front lines. Chocolate bars became a critical part of a soldier's rations at the front. In 1940, Hershey's developed a special emergency ration bar built specifically for military use. The bars were field tested in hot climates like the Philippines and Panama to ensure they'd hold up under extreme heat. After Pearl Harbor in 1941, they were even repackaged to guard against poison gas exposure. The best-known version, the Tropical Bar, debuted in 1943 for troops fighting in the Pacific and was engineered to survive intense heat. For much of the war, nearly all of Hershey's chocolate output went straight to the U.S. military. The original military specification for the bar was almost comically strict. It had to weigh 4 ounces, provide enough calories to sustain a soldier for a full day in an emergency, withstand high heat without melting, and, according to popular telling, taste only slightly better than a boiled potato, so soldiers wouldn't be tempted to eat it as a regular snack. Hershey's had to rework its usual chocolate-making process entirely, since standard chocolate simply melted in tropical and jungle conditions, and the company built a separate production line just for military rations. Beyond the Tropical Bar, Hershey's also produced the earlier D-Ration Bar, a denser, less palatable version, eventually phased out as feedback came in from soldiers in the field.
None of these food substitutions and creative swaps happened in a vacuum. They were all shaped by the rationing system the government rolled out through the Office of Price Administration. Every American household received ration books filled with stamps and coupons that had to be handed over alongside cash for items like sugar, meat, butter, and canned goods. Grocery shopping became a careful balancing act, with families tracking their remaining points the way people today might track a monthly budget. Running out of ration stamps before the next allotment arrived simply meant doing without, no matter how much cash was sitting in your wallet. This system touched nearly every corner of the American diet, and it's a big part of why the foods on this list became so central to daily life. They were often the items that weren't tightly rationed, or that stretched further than the alternatives. Sugar was among the very first items rationed, starting in spring 1942, which is part of why wartime desserts like mock apple pie and depression cake leaned on substitutes. Canning became something of a national pastime as families preserved Victory Garden harvests for winter, and the government even eased sugar restrictions specifically for home canning, recognizing how essential it was to stretching the food supply. Taken together, these wartime foods were a snapshot of a country reorganizing its relationship with food around sacrifice and ingenuity. Many faded once rationing ended, but others, like Spam Musubi or SOS, carved out a lasting place in American food culture.
If you enjoyed this look back, don't forget to drop a comment and let us know which of these wartime foods surprised you the most. Hit that like button and subscribe for more videos like this one from American Archive. It really helps a small channel grow. And we've got plenty more nostalgic deep dives on the way.